I played every single classic COD Zombies map. I tried to do it in a week, but there's too many of them. Everything from World at War, where zombies first began, all the way up to Black Ops 2, released in 2012. Now, I planned on playing Black Ops 3 as well, but I didn't get to do that. And we'll get to why a little bit later. But Call of Duty Zombies has always fascinated me, because it's something that started out as such a simple concept that wasn't really meant to be a main event of the franchise. Something that was not only hidden behind completing the single-player campaign, but it also wasn't even particularly complicated. But what it eventually turned into was something far larger and far more complicated than that. A simple concept of a zombie horde trying to overwhelm you became a story about time travel, destroying the Earth, and mystical ancient lands that corrupt the minds of soldiers, with giant robots wandering through France in 1918. I played a ton of COD Zombies when I was a kid, so the main reason for me doing this video is the unreasonable levels of nostalgia that I have for the first game on the list. That game being the first game that ever featured zombies, and just the menu music alone was bringing back all kinds of memories. When Call of Duty World at War first released in 2008, it was just your average everyday Call of Duty release. The World War II aesthetic was what the franchise was mostly known for at the time, and nowhere in the marketing was there any mention of any zombie horde survival game modes. It was hidden pretty deep, tucked away behind completing the entire main campaign, and even when you did do that, it never showed up on the main menu. There was just one map, called Nacht der Untoten, Night of the Living Dead. It opens with a cutscene of a wounded pilot watching as a horde begins to run towards him, and then you wake up inside the map. And I love it. I love every part of it. Every single nostalgia receptor in my old man brain was going absolutely buck wild the entire time I played this. When you die and you lose your run, the game goes like... And when you open the mystery box, it's all like... Bing, bang, ba-ding, bang, 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 bang. And when you pick up the nuke, the guy's all like... Kaboom. He goes like, kaboom. And the music, every time you go to the next round, is like... Oh yeah, that's the best bit. That's the best part of the whole game. I have so much nostalgia for this entire game because it was what I played when I was a kid. I was about 9 years old when this released, and because of that nostalgia, this is my favorite zombies game. All of the maps from Call of Duty World at War are incredible, and despite its simplicity, this map is also incredible. It's extremely small, and the only unique mechanic is the mystery box. There's only 3 doors to buy with points, and there's only a handful of guns on the walls. There's no perks, or pack-a-punch machine, or any of that stuff that you'd be accustomed to in modern maps. It's just these small rooms, and this strange little box with 2 question marks on top. But that's all you need, baby. That's all you need to make this map fun for hours. The mystery box is one of the only unique mechanics that the map really has to offer, but that's not actually a bad thing, because the mystery box is a great gameplay mechanic, because it means you have to work with whatever you're given at the time and keep rolling it and try and survive with the terrible weapons it gives you. And the mystery box also lets the devs hide some wacky stuff in the map too, like the ray gun, a gun that only exists in the base game in the form of an Easter egg, and only really exists in the first place to be a power weapon in the mystery box in zombies mode. There's also power-ups. Zombies occasionally drop power-ups that do wacky things like give you insta-kills for a few seconds, or blow up every zombie on the map. This very simple map is what got players hooked on the zombie formula all the way back in 2008. Just these few little rooms with a mystery box and some power-ups. That's all it took. And I had a total blast playing it. I played it with a couple of friends and some random guy called Renart97, who was actually pretty good at the game. He slightly carried us. It was a ton of fun. The only complaint I really had was that the early rounds on this map can be really, really slow, so subsequent playthroughs can get a little bit boring. But there is some other stuff to mention. Like, by modern standards, this map is pretty janky. The zombies AI is a little bit funky. Like, sometimes they just don't hit you when they get near you, and sometimes they path in strange ways that can catch you off guard and get you killed. And they can't double hit you like the more aggressive zombies in later maps can, which means you can get some really strange interactions where things don't seem to make much sense. But it's not like it was completely awful. It's just a little bit slower and wonkier than the more modern maps ever were. The biggest thing you'll notice when looking at this map through a modern lens, other than the lack of perks works and stuff is that the map's just really slow. It takes forever for the zombies to actually reach the windows, especially in the early rounds, which means that the early rounds crawl by super slowly, and there's not really anything you can do to actually speed that up. You've just got to wait it out, basically, which is fine at first, but it makes playing the map on multiple playthroughs pretty frustrating, because you can spend a ton of time just stood around doing nothing. Since this was the first zombies map ever made, and they didn't really know if it was going to be popular or not, they didn't actually spend a ton of time or budget on it. In fact, from listening to Treyarch developers from the time talk about it, turns out that this original zombies map was actually just made in the developers' free time when they weren't working on anything else. And worst of all, it was entirely unapproved by management.
The team is crunched. Late stage innovation, unapproved, unplanned, unscheduled, definitely ungreenlit work in an established franchise, and zombies at this point, they're clearly off-brand.
In fact, the devs made their zombies mode entirely in secret, and the only reason it was included in the end product is because when the higher-ups at Activision and Treyarch finally found out about the game mode, they played it and thought it was pretty cool and had a bunch of fun. But the reason zombies mode in World at War is hidden behind beating the campaign is because they didn't want it to be the first thing you saw on the main menu. Call of Duty was known at the time for its relatively realistic depictions of war settings, so zombies were incredibly off-brand. So they decided that if they were going to put this fun game mode in the game, they didn't want it to be the first thing people tried when they loaded up the game. They wanted people to at least play the semi-realistic World War II simulator campaign before stumbling upon the game mode that had the zombies in it. But this was clearly a massive success because people loved zombies. People loved that there was this funny, wacky game mode hidden behind the campaign that was a ton of fun. And it was a pleasant surprise when they found it because it wasn't in any of the marketing material. So when Treyarch started making map packs for the multiplayer of World at War, they realized that they should probably add some zombies maps too. So their first map pack that they released delivered a brand new, more refined zombies experience. Verrückt was the first new map they decided to add to zombies. This is pretty hot off the heels of the success of the original zombies map, so they decided if they were going to make a new one, they should make it bigger and better. The main thing they were looking to solve here was the complexity, or at least the lack of complexity. The original map was incredibly simple. There was not enough stuff to spend money on, and there was not enough unique mechanics, and the map was just too damn small. So they tried to address all these complaints in a handful of ways. Now, I'm not going to list off every new thing they added for every new map for the entire video, because that sounds really boring, but for these early World at War maps, I am going to do that. Just to hit home how crazy their innovations were on this game mode in the early days, and how much the modern audience takes all of these things that were pioneered for granted. So first off, they added a power switch, because there was now a bunch of new machines and stuff to interact with, but they didn't want you to just sit and generate points and buy them all instantly. So they added a power switch that you needed to turn on to activate those machines. There's also a door in the middle of the main starting area that can only be opened by turning on the power. That power switch is on the other side of the map. 2 players spawn on the left side and 2 players spawn on the right side. Turning on the power unites both sides of the map together and also enables a bunch of perk machines, which was the next addition they made. Perk machines gave you more stuff to spend your money on and made it more realistic to get to higher rounds. Perks that made you reload faster and take more hits or shoot faster and revive teammates faster. So the days of getting tons of points and having just nothing to spend them on weren't completely over, but the perk machines were certainly helping. They also chose to make the map way bigger, which was obviously a no-brainer. The map is at least twice the size of the original map. Now, if you make a new map for a relatively new game mode that's way bigger than the original, you run the risk of having players get lost. But they actually circumvented this problem in a very clever way. The map is massive, but despite that, it's just one big circle. It's literally impossible to go the wrong way, because every direction you go in leads you to the power switch. And the power switch and the mystery box always spawn in the same room. And this is something that the devs used time and time again in future maps to make them less difficult to understand for new players. Although they did ditch this philosophy eventually, because, you know, I think confusing people was their goal in some of the later maps. But in Verrückt and most of the maps in this era, the maps were made to be giant loops to make sure that you would never get lost and never get confused and never go the wrong way. Although for some reason they decided that this absolutely absolutely blinding flashing light in the power room was like okay for some reason. Like, look at how bad this flickering is. It's awful. I guess World at War came out before epilepsy was invented or something. That's the only explanation I've got. But luckily for me, the mystery box doesn't stay here forever. In Nacht, the mystery box never moves and you just re-roll it in this one same spot forever. So they decided that in their new map, the box should be able to move. There's a random chance that you roll a teddy bear in the mystery box and the teddy bear forces the box to move to a different location in the map. And this is another great addition because they wanted to discourage you from just sitting in one spot for the entire game. It makes it so that subsequent playthroughs don't all feel the same as each other, because you have to centralize yourself in different parts of the map depending on where the box moved to. The other clever trick that people don't really think about is that when you go down, you lose all of your perks and you have to buy them again. So if you do happen to go down, you have to leave whatever safe zone you've been training zombies in the whole game and actually run around the map to buy perks without dying. Without this, your teammates would just get you back up and then you would just continue staying in the exact same spot some more. It forces you to do risky things when things start to go wrong. There's a lot of things that people take for granted that were innovated right here in the second ever Zombies map. And this map, as well as future maps, are better off for it. It's an improvement to Nacht in pretty much every possible way, even down to the tiny details like the zombies' sound effects being different. They even improved the AI of the zombies and allowed them to double hit you and be generally faster and more aggressive. I'm not sure if it's the nostalgia talking, but this is one of my favourite maps they ever made. Sure, it's missing some of the more prominent features of a few later maps, but even without them, it's a ton of fun. Because the new zombies maps added in the map packs could have very easily been the exact same thing as the original map, but with like a new coat of paint. Realistically, they didn't have to innovate anything at all. People already liked the zombies mode, so the fact that they were changing it for the better is a pleasant surprise. They decided that this map needed to be an improvement, not just an addition, which is a mentality that not enough companies have nowadays. But every single map they added to World at War really did feel like it made zombies a brand new experience with how many things they were doing to change the game mode. And Verrückt is no exception to this. And neither was the next map to be released. Shi No Numa is the first map where the developers decided that the zombies mode should have a story. A story about time travel, destroying the planet, and some mystical little girl ghost or whatever. Listen, I'm not going to talk about the story too much in this video, because I don't have a PhD from Harvard in zombology, so I can't exactly do the story justice, and I don't want to incur the wrath of the zombies lore experts in my comment section when I say something wrong. But if you're into that sort of thing, this map is the beginning of all of that story stuff. All of that wacky shit where the devs were losing their minds and had us destroy the planet and time travel and whatever. This is where it all began. It was the introduction of the 4 named playable characters, all with extremely stereotypical voice acting.
Look at that mess I just made. Oorah!
And a whole bunch of lore hidden behind various Easter egg hunts and stuff that the franchise would eventually become known for. If that's your sort of bag, and that's what you're interested in, then that's great, but I'm not the right place to learn about any of that, because I don't care. It's way too complicated, and I didn't keep up with it as a kid, so it's all completely lost on me. I want to talk about the gameplay. Gameplay's where it's at. And Shi No Numa has pretty cool gameplay. It's not too revolutionary, especially considering how much Verrückt adapted the initial formula, but it definitely added some stuff that's worth noting. The most notable thing added is obviously the dog rounds. Special rounds would occur every 4 to 5 rounds and would spawn zombie dogs that would appear in random places nearby the player and would start running towards them when shot at. They require a completely different strategy to defeat than the normal zombies rounds, and they give you a max ammo power up when they're defeated. It's a really cool way to break up the potential monotony of doing basically the same thing over and over again, and it made it so that max ammo drops weren't entirely random, so you couldn't just lose the game to RNG. You were actually able to plan ahead for when there was gonna be a guaranteed max ammo. They also added a brand new weapon called the Wunderwaffe DG2. I hope you guys like my German pronunciation, because I'm gonna be doing that a lot this video. This gun was a brand new wonder weapon that went alongside the ray gun, and it's pretty damn cool. It would one-shot groups of zombies no matter what the round was. It would chain lightning between clumps of zombies and kill all of them instantly. And one of the best strats for getting high rounds on the map revolved around using this one weapon to run in circles in one of the courtyard areas, clump up a horde of zombies, and kill all of them in one shot. This weapon is a really great addition to the game, and it adds more than just one single option for what the best high round weapon is. They also added some randomized perk machine spawns, which is actually a really cool mechanic. I know some people hate it and complain about it, but I think it's a clever way to make every attempt at the map feel different. This map isn't a circle like Verrückt was, but instead it's a big cross, with each perk machine spawn being at the tip of one of the points of the cross. And this is again likely done to make it so that it's hard to get lost as a new player, and it works like a charm. The map is pretty fun. You get access to the mystery box incredibly early, and training the zombies around these wide open areas is fun, but it's still challenging because of the swamp water that slows you down, but not the zombies. This map is much more similar to Verrückt than Verrückt was similar to Nacht, but that's okay, because the innovation at this time mostly came in the form of story additions. New playable characters with a bunch of new, funny, wacky lore to learn about. That's what Shi No Numa brought to the table, and it was improved on even further by Riese. I'm just gonna lay my cards out on the table and say that this is my favorite zombies map, hands down. Is that a fair assessment of the map's quality in terms of gameplay? Maybe. Is my opinion of the map drastically inflated by nostalgia because 9-year-old me really liked the map? Yes. Yeah. Definitely, actually. But it's so good though. This map is a banger. This map was the most visually appealing out of all of them so far, and it made one relatively simple but extremely powerful addition to the zombies game mode. That addition being the Pack-a-Punch machine. This map had 3 teleporters set up in 3 different locations in the map. These teleporters all teleport you to the same place, this main area that you start in. Linking all 3 teleporters to the mainframe unlocks the Pack-a-Punch machine, a machine that lets you upgrade your gun for 5,000 points. This is probably the best addition to zombies that they ever made, hands down. It is so simple, yet it does so many things all at once. It gives more variety to high round strategies, because instead of relying solely on the wonder weapons, you can actually use pack-a-punched versions of already powerful weapons instead, which opens up the possibility of many more variations on different high round strategies for the maps. It also means that weapons that are typically extremely weak and get thrown away early actually have a use case now when they're Pack-a-Punch. It also gives you another thing to sink your points into, making it less likely that you get completely set up and just sit on thousands of points with nothing to spend them on. It also gives you more replay value. Finding out what each gun does when it's Pack-a-Punch is an extremely good reason to go back and play the maps again. It's easily the best addition they made to the game mode ever. So much so that a bunch of modern maps actually have puzzles and core mechanics that revolve entirely around how to unlock the Pack-a-Punch. The teleporters are an interesting addition as well. An extra way to escape the horde when you're overrun and pinned down is always pretty cool. And since this is the biggest map yet, a way to fast travel around the map easily is also a nice addition. There's more lore, because of course there is, with a bunch of wacky Easter egg hunt stuff to do along the way. As much as I'm sure hardcore zombies fans might disagree with me, this map, as well as a few of the earlier maps in Black Ops, feel like the golden age of zombies. This is the start of the perfect point in the timeline for me. This is when the game had lore, but it wasn't crazy complicated multiple dimension time travel stuff going on. And it had Easter eggs, but you didn't need to study zombology to understand them. And the gameplay was all about being a survival horde mode, and any side objectives were just that, side objectives, and they were never the main event. Riese marks the beginning of that golden age. A golden age that would of course not last forever, but we're gonna make sure to enjoy that golden age while it lasts, because Riese is the last map they ever added to World at War. We saw no new zombies maps until the release of Black Ops in 2010, and Black Ops starts out pretty strong. Before I actually talk about the map though, I need to talk about this menu screen. Look at how cool it is. Is this nostalgia talking again? Maybe it is, but the menu is really, really cool. You actually look around the menu as if it's a playable area, and the actual main menu is just on this TV screen. And this time, zombies is a mainstay on the main menu, not tucked away behind beating the entire campaign. And you can see the zombie scientist bashing on the glass window and stuff. It does a really awesome job at setting the tone, something that the rest of the games don't really try and do at all. The only issue with this menu is that it's not very PC friendly, because the mouse would be what you clicked on the menus with, but the mouse controls the camera instead. It's a little bit weird at first. But anyway, onto the actual map. Kino Der Toten is a 10 out of 10 banger. Since Kino is the launch map for a brand new game, they didn't really want to change the formula too much. Everybody already knew and loved zombies from 2008 with World at War, so Kino basically has all of the same mechanics that Riese had, except with Black Ops weapons and Black Ops tops graphics. And that might sound underwhelming considering what we've just talked about, but the jump from game to game is worth noting here. They want to make sure that the core Zombies audience from the first game come back to the second game and still enjoy it. Once that audience has been captured, then you can start going off and making all of your changes or whatever. But everything else is still the same. The mystery box from Nacht still remains, and the box moves just like it did in Verrückt, and the dog rounds from Shi No Numa are still a staple. The pack-a-punch is here just like it is in Riese, and it's accessed in pretty much the exact same way. Everything you would expect from the most refined version of World at War Zombies is here in Black Ops. There is the odd new thing though, like a couple of new types of traps or whatever, but that's basically it. Oh, and there's also these like smelly zombies. These new weird crawlers prevent you from just constantly aiming at head level to kill stuff. They force you to actually pay attention and look down. They also explode after dying, which makes training around these zombies a little bit harder, and it also makes sitting in a corner with powerful weapons a ton more difficult. But the fact that the Black Ops launch map didn't really change anything is actually a good thing, because not every player actually stuck around to see the release of maps like Riese or Shi No Numa. Lots of people by that time period would have already moved on from Call of Duty Zombies. So those people were pleasantly surprised by all the new mechanics, and the hardcore players got an experience that they're already happy and familiar with, so they're happy too. Something funny that I did notice in Kino is that Tank Dempsey, one of the playable characters, literally breaks the fourth wall in a bunch of his voice lines.
Hey, player! I need more ammo or we're going down!
There's meant to be this, like, deep immersive lore about the Zombies game mode, but they've also got wacky, over-the-top, stereotypical voice lines, some of which literally break the fourth wall and address the player directly. This is definitely one of those things that has always struck me about Zombies mode, even since when I was a kid. There's a clash in tone between the voice lines and the Easter eggs and the power-ups and all that stuff, and the aesthetics and core themes of the game. The core theme is bleak, dark, World War II German decor with zombies screaming everywhere that's clearly horror inspired. But there's also this goofy wacky element where it's not really taking itself too seriously. It kind of exists in every map from Shi No Numa onwards, but Kino is the first map where it really became apparent to me. Now that's of course not really a huge issue at all, but it's definitely something I thought was worth mentioning, mainly because it's kind of amusing. Kino is great. It uses a ton of the same mechanics and tricks used in World at War to make a very casual friendly zombies experience. It's not hard to understand, it's not hard to figure out where to go, it's that classic zombie survival mode vibe. There's only one teleporter to link to the main starting room to access the pack-a-punch, but you need to re-link it every single time you want to access it. Kino is a simple, accessible map meant to draw in new players to the zombie game mode. But Black Ops didn't just have one zombies map on launch. Kino was the one that offered the most accessible casual experience, but the other one, that was locked behind completing the campaign, was much more difficult and much more complex. Five is a map called 5, but it's actually the 6th Zombies map, which really makes me sick to my stomach. And this map is actually a little bit strange. The map is the Pentagon, you know, the American government building. And the 4 playable characters are John F. Kennedy, Robert McNamara, Richard Nixon, and Fidel Castro. Yeah, there's no way that they could make this today without getting a ton of media attention. Having former US presidents and Cuban dictators not only be playable characters in a zombie game, but also having them say wacky, stupid, stereotypical one-liners while killing zombies.
Do I look like a guy with a foot fetish?
Would just not go under the radar today. You know, maybe someone would decide to make it, but it would spark tons of media outrage. But as far as I remember, there was no media outrage whatsoever at this. Nobody cared. It's probably likely that the reason this didn't attract much attention was because it was locked behind the campaign, which meant that most of the typical journalist types that would have seen it didn't actually even know it was there. And you know, perhaps it's a good thing that it didn't spark controversy, because it's not actually that much of a big deal. It's not like that one other thing that Call of Duty got tons of negative press about, because that one actually deserved the negative press. But maybe it's a good thing that this one flew under the radar, because it's all in good fun and stuff. Even if it is a little bit odd that there was an actual US president that actually got assassinated in real life, shooting zombies and saying funny one-liners in my video game in 2010. But that's not the important part. The important part, again, is gameplay. And 5 is the map that was a little bit more geared towards hardcore players. There's a complex series of elevators that make the map incredibly vertical and hard to access any area you want at any given time. And there's teleporters buttons that take you to random locations, making it very easy to get lost. And most parts of the level are tightly spaced steel corridors, making training zombies harder in most areas. So instead of being a big circle that's impossible to get lost in, it's actually a giant multi-layered map that's incredibly easy to get lost in. But as much as that sounds like I'm complaining, 5 is actually a really fun map. For the time period, it was considered quite complex, but compared to some of the things that would get released in the future, this was not complex at all. And a big part of what makes it feel so complex, amusingly, is the fact that it isn't just one big circle. So even though it was more complex and easier to get lost, it wasn't so complex and easy to get lost that it detracted from the fun. The way you activate the Pack-a-Punch is very simple. You just turn the power on at the bottom floor, then go to the middle floor and flip 5 switches. But that felt kind of daunting to players at the time because of the difficulty that people were having with just navigating the map itself. And it was different enough from how you do it in the other 2 maps with the Pack-a-Punch that people were a bit lost. But it didn't take too long for people to figure out, and once people had figured it out, they started having fun with the map. And 5 nowadays is a beloved map. But on launch day, there was quite a lot of confusion from people who had no idea what the hell was going on. There was also a new addition that replaced dog rounds. They replaced dogs with, like, some guy. He's called the Pentagon Thief. He runs at you and steals your weapons and only gives you them back when he dies. And he drops different power-ups based on whether you killed him or not, or whether he touched you and stole your guns or not. Which again, for the time period, this was super complex and crazy. The fact that there was so much to learn about this map was crazy at the time, and people wanted more of that. They wanted more difficulty, and they wanted more complexity. And little by little, with every map added, these players got exactly what they were looking for. Right out of the gate with their first map pack for Black Ops was Ascension. This is the first map on the list that I don't really have any nostalgia for, actually. I did play it as a kid, but only maybe once or twice. By this point in my childhood, I was much more of a Halo Reach kind of guy, you know? But nostalgia or not, you can immediately tell that the zombie devs were really starting to try and innovate upon what they'd already made, just like they were doing back in the World at War days. They wanted to make changes to the gameplay to see what they could come up with, and their first instinct, apparently, was monkeys. Hear me out, okay? Listen. So monkeys are the new replacement for dogs. The dog rounds from other maps were starting to become stale for some people, because they'd been in many maps by this point, and they decided that instead of having an alternate wave that would summon different enemies to attack you, instead there would be enemies that would attack something else in the map. And that something else is the perk machines. The monkeys go to the perk machines and attack them, and if they successfully destroy the perk machine, you lose the perk that you've already bought and you have to buy it again. And I thought this mechanic was a really cool addition to the game for the most part. It's an interesting concept because it gives you other objectives besides your own survival. Your secondary objective is the survival of the perk machines, which is really interesting. The only key flaw with the monkey rounds is actually pretty obvious when you think about it for more than 2 seconds. The monkey rounds are incredibly hard to defend against in single player. They're a really cool addition in multiplayer, but the fewer players you have, the harder it is to protect every single one of your perks. 2 players can just about defend 4 perk machines if you're good at the game, but a single player on their own, no matter how good they are, is going to seriously struggle to defend every single perk. It's certainly possible if you're extremely good at the game, but it'll be a massive struggle if you're anything less than a god. And this map is huge. So this manifests itself as solo players who buy all 4 of the perks will lose 1 or 2 of their perks every 5 rounds or so for the rest of the game. So they made the biggest map in history, and they added location-based threats to the game, which harms solo players way more than it harms 4-man squads. But despite that hiccup, I think that the monkeys are a really cool addition. Ascension's layout is somewhat circular, but it's not entirely circular. It's got a lot of verticality to it, which means that it's relatively easy to navigate the map on a first playthrough, but it doesn't feel as linear as the other maps like Verrückt and Riese. The extra verticality and branching paths and offshoots and stuff make the map feel a lot less linear. They added wacky new grenades and lunar landers instead of teleporters, and there's even a new perk called PhD Flopper, because Black Ops added a belly flop mechanic for some reason, and PhD Flopper lets you belly flop from a height and explode when you hit the ground, which deals tons of AoE damage. And this perk is actually really good in the early rounds too. So it's fun and stupid and goofy, but it's also actually effective. Using all 3 of the lunar landers is similar to linking all 3 teleporters in Riese, and it lets you access the Pack-a-Punch when you do it. But this one's a lot more dramatic, because you access the Pack-a-Punch by launching a giant rocket into space. The area underneath this rocket is is where the Pack-a-Punch is, so launching the rocket allows you to go there. They were seeing what they could get away with without going too overboard. It's wacky and out there, but not to the point of absurdity. It's meant to be sci-fi, right? So teleporters, zombies, and lunar landers and all that wackiness is sort of within reason. As long as it served the gameplay in a positive way, then people were okay with it. And all of those wacky Easter egg hunts people are going on, they're all entirely in the background. They're not mandatory for you to enjoy the map, and they don't intrude on gameplay. Ascension, in my opinion, is where the golden age of zombies ends. There are maps that released after Ascension that are good, of course that's a given. But Ascension marks the last map in a long string of maps dating all the way back to Riese that truly felt like exactly what zombies should be. At least to me. I'm sure what I just said is sacrilege to some people who are hardcore zombie fans, and that's fine. But for my personal tastes, this is the end of the golden age. Now we have to go talk about the map that they released that finally broke Treyarch's hot streak of awesome zombies maps. Call of the Dead, in my opinion, is a ginormous drop in quality from maps like Kino, Ascension, and 5. Call of the Dead has one brand new key gimmick, and that gimmick is George Romero. Real life, actual human being movie director George Romero, but like he's a zombie. He's a huge zombie that is functionally immortal. He can technically be killed with a few strategies, but in regular gameplay he is invulnerable. And even if you do manage to kill him, killing him only makes him go away for a few rounds at a time anyway. He constantly comes back whether you kill him or not, and he constantly follows you slowly around the map. If you damage him at all in any way, even just with your pistol, he becomes enraged, and he sprints at you forever. There's only two ways to stop him from being really angry that you shot him in the face. You can make him run through ice water, which will calm him down but also slow you down, or you can shoot him with the new wonder weapon. This new wonder weapon apparently turns zombies into humans, which makes the other zombies attack them instead of you. But I didn't figure this out when I played it because I was too busy trying not to be mauled by an actual real life human being George Romero. I hate this mechanic. I hate George Romero. Not real George Romero, that's fine. I mean the zombie George Romero. He's pretty much completely unstoppable, and it only takes one single tiny mistake to have him completely destroy your run. He makes it 10 times harder to train zombies, and can very quickly push you into dead ends and kill you immediately. He's also a very frustrating multiplayer mechanic, especially when playing with randoms, mainly because it's incredibly griefable. Just shoot George Romero once at an inopportune time, and the game's basically over for your entire team. Shoot him while he's targeting one guy in particular, and that player is probably instantly dead, assuming they're not near any ice water or something. If that player has the new wonder weapon, you can just shoot him again, and he enrages again, and do this until they've run out of ammo. And if you've spent more than 15 minutes on the internet, you know full well that this is exactly what people will do to you if they decide they don't like you in a multiplayer game for some reason. George is a massive chore to dodge. There are huge chunks of the map that are nowhere near ice water, so if you enrage him by accident, you're pretty much screwed. And in multiplayer, it doesn't even take someone literally griefing you on purpose, because people make mistakes, and people are bad at video games.
I shot him.
So whether it's an accident or not, you're gonna get screwed over by your teammates shooting George Romero. If you're some sort of god gamer, then you can evade George Romero, but it's really hard, and apparently I'm no god gamer, so I just die to it. You might also be wondering why actual real-life human being movie director George Romero's in the map. Well, it's simple really. It's because the cast of 4 playable characters are now movie stars that star in a George Romero movie that went wrong. So your playable characters are actually Robert Englund, Danny Trejo, Michael Rooker, and Sarah Michelle Gellar, all 4 of which are constantly spouting over-the-top stereotypical wacky one-liners the entire time, which maybe would be amusing if the map wasn't just intensely frustrating to play in. This map is absolutely gargantuan, with lots of doors, and it's very easy to get lost in. And you can't even get to a high-up vantage point to try and see where you might want to unlock next, because the entire map is blanketed by fog, so you can't actually see the rest of the map even if you wanted to. There's zip lines and flingers and stuff to get from one place to another if you turn the power on, but this doesn't really solve the problem because a lot of these things are only one-way travel. Oh, and did I forget to mention that one part where George fucking Romero is chasing me around with a giant stage light and electrocuting me with it? That part doesn't help either. This map, to me at least, is the marker of where the Zombies devs started to go out of their minds. There's lots of things that they added to Call of the Dead that strike me as being there, not because they think the gameplay is cool, but because they think the idea itself is cool. Because yeah, having a giant unkillable zombie follow you around is an interesting concept, and having it be actual real-life George Romero is also pretty cool. You know, he's the grandfather of the zombie genre, so it's an awesome homage to the real-life person. But the actual gameplay that spawns from having this giant bastard follow me around the entire game isn't fun at all. It makes training zombies in one particular area practically impossible unless that area is huge. And it means that a single tiny mistake of shooting George Romero one time by accident can pretty much instantly end your run unless you spend the entire game training around the ice water areas, which then in itself has its own bunch of problems. But even that doesn't solve it, because George Romero can still hit you while he isn't enraged. It's just that he doesn't run very fast. So even in the ice water, he can still get in the middle of your train and hit you as you run past him. There are a few methods to kill George Romero, but they don't permanently remove him from the game anyway. You instead have to do it to complete the Easter egg. Even if you manage to spend all of that time and energy killing him, he just retreats into the water and comes back 2 rounds later. The only way to truly get rid of him is to shoot him with the pack-a-punched version of the new wonder weapon, the VR-11. This makes him go back into the water for the rest of the round, so as long as you have enough ammo to keep him in the water, you can live free of his presence for as long as you have ammo. But if the method to deal with George is to literally not interact with him ever, then isn't George just a terrible mechanic to begin with? People literally spend one of their weapon slots entirely just to not have to deal with George Romero. To me, that sounds like he's an incredibly frustrating mechanic that maybe shouldn't have been there. Because you can kite George Romero. It's not completely impossible. I know that I'm bad at video games, but if you're good at the game, you don't instantly die from screwing up and shooting him. But it's way more punishing than anything else that's ever been seen in any map that came before it. And he slows you as well. When he hits you with the light, it like slows you down, which just makes matters even worse. This map is a complete mess. The George Romero mechanic, as cool as it is on paper, is something that I despise more than any other mechanic I've ever seen in any of the other zombies maps I've ever played. It's so cool on paper, but it's just unbearable in practice. And I know I mentioned this briefly when talking about Kino, but what the hell is the tone they're even going for with this? It's a super dark, bleak map, and it's clearly horror themed. You know, George Romero's literally in the map, so it's clearly a horror themed map. There's zombies everywhere. Real life, actual person George Romero, someone that the playable characters have assumedly all met and worked with, has literally died and become a zombie, yet the voice lines are a constant slew of shitty one-liners and bad jokes.
Boink!
And there's flingers that catapult you around the map like it's a theme park, and you can ray gun zombies and turn them into humans. Like, what is the tone they're going for? Is it a horror map, or is it a funny haha we got George Romero in our game map? The weird shift in tone exists in quite a lot of the maps, but it's at its worst here, at least in my opinion. And of course I'm sure a lot of people don't care about that sort of thing, but to me it's incredibly grating, especially when I'm already annoyed at the map. And the fact that this is the one that ends their hot streak of banger after banger is just such a damn shame. George Romero doesn't deserve this. Dead Ops Arcade is like a secret minigame that's baked into Zombies mode in Black Ops. It's like a top-down twin-stick shooter similar to stuff like Smash TV from the 90s. There's apparently a final boss to Dead Ops Arcade, but I didn't reach it. I was playing for like 30 minutes and seemingly wasn't even really close to the end, and then I died. And I didn't ever play it again. There's power-ups and stuff that give you new weapons or whatever, and you can like turn into a tank and stuff like that. It's pretty cool, I guess. It's just a twin-stick shooter minigame that was probably thrown together in a week or two as an Easter egg. It's technically zombies, so I thought I'd mention it. Although I have basically nothing to say about it, other than the fact that it was cool for like an hour. But it's not really a zombies map, so I guess I'll get back to talking about, you know, actual zombies maps. Shangri-La, described in one word, is traps. Shangri-La is the trap map. There's traps all over the place on this map. It's supposed to be set in like a temple somewhere in the Himalayas, so of course there's like a bunch of tribal looking booby traps everywhere. Most of which are pretty harmless and don't cause too many problems. The mud trap in particular though felt really obnoxious. It creates a random maze when you try and cross it that you have very little control over. So taking this path is just always risky no matter what, which makes it feel like this one section of the map is like basically useless. They've also done done away with special rounds in favor of just having new types of zombies sprinkled into the normal rounds. First, there's napalm zombies. They're just like big fire guys that explode on death and deal a ton of damage to you. And when they get close, they start obscuring your vision, and if they get too close, they actually burn you. There's also shrieker zombies that sprint extremely fast and scream when they get close to you, which blinds your vision and seemed like it slowed me down slightly. When they're killed, they let out a shriek that kills all of the nearby zombies. These are, in my opinion, worse than special rounds ever were. They're pretty cool, but the special rounds always acted as a way to break up the monotony, which is now lost with these zombies being here just instead of special rounds. They do make it harder to train in wide open areas, which is nice for difficulty's sake, but they lose that break from the action that dog and monkey rounds gave you. Also, they're just way less exciting than dogs and monkeys in my opinion, just like in terms of thematics. The map is relatively circular, but the traps make it hard to navigate in a pinch from one place to another, and they force you to wait around a lot. So you're not really getting lost, but you do get stuck at certain places sometimes. There's a minecart and some wacky water jet stuff that can help you get around, but these traps are still roadblocks in certain areas that you just have to wait for no matter what. And the Pack-a-Punch unlock was a little bit awkward for me to figure out, and I had to Google it. And this was the first time I had to Google anything to figure it out so far. But unfortunately, it wouldn't be the last. The Pack-a-Punch requires you to stand on these pressure plates. In single player, you just step on one and the Pack-a-Punch opens, but in multiplayer there are up to 4. But I had quite a funny problem with this, in that I've played a bunch of CoD Zombies maps, and I've heard lots of people talk about Zombies maps, and it's very common that there are crazy story-based Easter eggs in these maps that unlock a bunch of story stuff. Stuff that I personally just don't really care about. And generally, I find that it's very easy to tell the difference between quests about stuff that changes gameplay and quests about stuff that does not, and is just towards an Easter egg. But in this case, I couldn't tell the difference. I was just under the assumption that this pressure plate was an Easter egg thing, because it doesn't look like it'd be related to the Pack-a-Punch machine. It's not located nearby, and it doesn't visually indicate that it would be linked to it at all. I guess neither do the Lunar Landers and the Teleporters, I guess. So maybe I'm just biased by nostalgia again. But for better or worse, I just assumed this was an Easter egg thing when it wasn't. And when I googled it, I learned the error of my ways and felt kinda stupid. In hindsight, I probably could have figured it out on my own. Like, it's not rocket science, but knowing that these maps are full of wacky wild goose chase Easter eggs, it just made me assume that this had nothing to do with me or the gameplay, so I just walked right past it. But other than that, I really don't have that many opinions on Shangri-La, to be honest. It's a very nice looking map, but that's sort of to be expected by this point because the budget that they're putting into zombies by now is much higher than it used to be. It was just one of the more forgettable maps to me. It wasn't awful, you know, I didn't hate it, yet I didn't particularly love it either. The best part about the map is that there's a little guy gun that turns zombies into little guys. That's funny, right? That's pretty funny. Treyarch's final send-off for Black Ops Zombies came in the form of a moon base at the end of the world. Like, you literally take a teleporter to the moon and have to run around a moon base with low gravity and a gas mask on. These people are out of their minds by now. But you know, my experience with Moon was actually a funny one, because I spent the entire time playing this map just complaining. Because everything after Ascension was brand new to me, and I never played it as a kid. So Moon, as a brand new player, was just frustrating me to no end. And the very first time I took the teleporter on my very first attempt at the map, this is what happened.
Oh, I forgot where to go. There's like gas mask or something somewhere. Not gas masks. Oh, here.
This is where I'm dead. Why? Why? It's so stupid! So even after I stopped suffocating myself on the moon, my whining didn't stop there. These spacesuit zombies are incredibly annoying. They make training really difficult, and if you don't have your gas mask on, they can pretty much just straight up kill you by teleporting you out into an area where there's no air. The anti-grav felt clunky to move around in, and it was pretty janky. Like, you could run into tiny bumps on the floor, and they would launch you into the air. There's this stupid dome area that has bumpers in it that literally got me killed with full damage multiple times because they don't work properly. Also, this dome is absolutely massive, but it's barren of almost anything to do inside of it, which is really weird. Finding where the parks are, or where anything is for that matter, was pretty tough without literally googling a map for it, because the map's really big and you're having to deal with a bunch of anti-grav wacky air mask mechanics and stuff at the same time. There's just tons of doors to buy, and the map's really big, and I was really confused, and I spent my entire time playing the map just complaining.
Eat shit and puke!
Eat shit and puke. But when I look back at it in hindsight, it's actually kind of a cool map. I think this map's pretty cool. This starting area where you're actually on the earth for a little bit is really, really interesting. The zombies start off here like normal, but after about a minute or so, the zombie spawn rate increases and they get faster and tankier. But if you're good enough at kiting around, you don't actually have to leave immediately. There's a perk machine that spawns right here behind you, and if you can survive the beefed up horde for long enough, you can generate enough points to buy this perk before teleporting away to the moon. This is also where the Pack-a-Punch is, meaning that there isn't some dumb puzzle to do to activate the Pack-a-Punch like some past and future maps have. It's just going to a location, which is pretty nice. This starting area is great both thematically and in terms of gameplay. The map can be pretty confusing to find where to go, but once you actually do know your way around, it's not exactly hard to remember, which is something that future maps sometimes fail at. There's also the little crawler guys from Kino again, and this time they can teleport in front of them a short distance. There are a lot of redeeming qualities about this map. As much as I was just complaining the entire time while I actually played it, I kind of enjoyed it in retrospect. And if you're one of those guys who's super into Easter egg hunts, then this map supposedly has one of the best that they ever made. Although I will admit that at this point, it does just feel like they're adding stuff for the sake of it. Like they've got an idea of what they want their story to look like, vaguely, and they just run with it. And if that means that you're literally stuck on the moon fighting zombies and there's weird spacemen that can teleport you and then you blow up the earth, then fuck it. That's what we're doing. That's what the story entails now. They leaned very heavily into the Easter egg hunt crowd and left the people who wanted a normal zombie survival mode in the dust. Which makes sense if you think about it, because the Easter egg hunt crowd are the people who are hardcore fans of your game, and Moon is the final map released in the game's life cycle. So the only people still playing zombies are the people who are hardcore dedicated to the game mode. So Moon is that sort of map that pleases those people who are still playing to no end. I guess what I'm trying to say is that my feelings on Moon were very mixed. I liked a lot of things about it, but I also hated a lot of things about it. But my overall experience, I think, was positive. But now Black Ops is finally over. Moon was the final map released for this game, and we wouldn't see another zombies map until 2012 with the release of Black Ops 2. And Black Ops 2 was changing things. It was changing a lot of things. And it wasn't necessarily changing them for the better. With zombies finally becoming a mainstay of the Call of Duty franchise, or at least the Treyarch Call of Duty games anyway, the zombies team was given a much larger budget to make their maps from now on. The budget for the Black Ops 2 launch map was bigger than ever, so they wanted to revolutionize everything. Make the game something brand new and exciting. Something groundbreaking that would be even better than the zombies maps that we were used to. And they failed. They failed big time. You know how in Black Ops they had Kino, where the launch map was relatively similar to what people were already familiar with? Well, instead of doing that, something that worked and was really popular at the time, they instead changed literally everything. Tranzit is a classic example of devs trying to get too ambitious. If you look at every map they've released before this point, their changes are relatively incremental. They don't change everything all at once. They add perks, then they add zombie dogs, then they add the Pack-a-Punch machine. It's done step by step. So even the most wacky and out there changes that we've seen so far have been made in maps that are at least somewhat understandable by veteran players. But Tranzit is not this at all. The map is absolutely gargantuan, the biggest map ever made by a large margin. And the reason for this is because there's basically 5 smaller maps connected to each other by giant roads that are barren of anything. If you want to travel from one section of the map to the next, you have to get on a bus and drive there, which only comes around every once in a while. And if you miss the bus, you're practically stranded in one location for the next 10 to 15 minutes while you wait for it to return. You can get around on foot, technically, but the map makes it painfully obvious that it doesn't want you to run through here on foot, because there's giant, thick black fog covering every region that isn't intended to be walked across. And most importantly, is that there's these little monkey bastard zombies called denizens that will infinitely spawn and chase you whenever you're inside of this fog. They're tankier than normal zombies, they're harder to shoot, they deal tons of damage, and they slow you and obscure your vision. And they never stop spawning so long as you're out in the fog. So although you technically can run around on foot, the map clearly doesn't want you to do this, and it will punish you hard for it. The layout of the map just in general also sucks really badly, but the map needs to be laid out this way for the bus mechanic to function. The power switch is at the 4th stop on the bus, which means a ton of time TJ tediously sat in a bus waiting to go places just to get to the power switch. It also means that you pass by a bunch of perks that you might actually want to buy before being able to even access them. So unless you want to loop around on foot and deal with the absolute garbage that's in the fog, you have to do multiple loops on the bus really slowly, which takes forever. And if you miss the bus at any point for any reason, you're stranded for a very, very long time. And running on foot is barely an option in most rounds higher than 10. Unless you leave one crawler just lying around, which can be circumstantially difficult to do, you just can't go anywhere on foot. The Pack-a-Punch is also a pain to access. It requires you to power up this generator with a turbine and then leave the turbine behind to go to the next area. Oh, did I mention there's a turbine? Yeah, there's a turbine. And also the turbine can be attacked by zombies, which means you have to leave it here, get on a bus, and hope the zombies don't attack it while you're on the bus going to where the Pack-a-Punch is. They decided that they were going to go all in on a crafting system for zombies now. They just weren't done innovating yet. The weird bus mechanic wasn't enough. So you can find parts all around the map. Parts that look pretty much identical to most background props at first glance. And then you craft those into usable items that do a bunch of different stuff. This turbine is like a mini power generator that lets you place it next to doors and perk machines and stuff like that. And it temporarily powers them up before you turn the power machine on. It's kind of an interesting mechanic, and the crafting mechanic is much better in later maps, but in Tranzit, the implementation of this is terrible. There's way too many things to craft, and it requires way too much trial and error to actually find where the parts for things even spawn. Also, they just overuse the mechanic. There's too many things to craft. Like, you even have to craft the power switch for some reason. Like, why? How does this serve gameplay in any way at all? I guess it tells newer players that there's a crafting system or whatever, but it doesn't really even do a good job of that, because when you go to the tables around the map, one of which is literally in the start room, that will tell you that there's something about parts that lets you craft stuff or whatever. All of the parts for the power switch are literally right next to where you build the power switch, so you could literally just have the switch work like every other switch, and the map would be objectively better for it. Not to mention that one of the parts for the switch is literally a zombie hand. A hand that looks identical to all of the other dead zombie body parts that are everywhere because you're shooting zombies with guns in a zombie game. So the switch won't actually let you turn the power on until you attach the zombie hand to it, for no reason. It's just tedious and poorly implemented and only exists because the devs wanted to go wacky mode with their new game. I'm convinced that they didn't think about how making you craft the power switch would serve gameplay for a single second. They just did it because they wanted to use their new crafting gimmick as much as possible. There's also a bank, which isn't something I actually interacted with when I played the map myself very much, but it's another mechanic that fundamentally changes how the game works. And it changes it in a bad way. It's a bad mechanic. You can store points in the bank and then come back to the bank on a different run to take those points out. So you can spend a run or two just points farming and dumping the points into the bank, and then on a brand new game, round 1, you can just run to the bank and take out literally 30,000 points instantly. And because it's round 1, running there instantly without the bus isn't even particularly hard. So if all of these other drastic game-altering changes weren't enough, you can also just start the game with near infinite points and completely disrupt the natural progression and setup of a zombies game. And this isn't even all of the stuff they added, but I'm not going to keep going because there's too many new things. They tried to change so many things all at once, and most if not all of those changes were overwhelmingly negative. The only additions that were even remotely good were the things that were relatively small changes, like the new boss enemies that are just like electric guys or whatever. They're kind of cool, I guess. And the crafting system is a good feature in future maps, but in this map, it's terribly implemented. And all of this leads to a map that's generally considered by most players to be the worst zombies map they ever made. And I personally agree with that. This is the worst map on the entire list. You know, as much as I have a personal beef with Call of the Dead and George Romero, apparently, if I take a step back from that for a second, Tranzit is clearly the worst map they ever made. It added so many mechanics that actively made the game worse. Everything becomes a chore just because of the bus. Getting perks, getting the box, pack-a-punching weapons, getting to certain good locations to train zombies in. All of these very basic mechanics are turned into a tedious grind by the existence of the bus. I mean, there's literally good training spots in lots of the areas that are literally blocked when the bus shows up. There is a strategy to just sit on the bus and never leave, and this can actually work until a relatively high round pretty safely. But doing that is incredibly boring. And if you want to play the map in any other way, it's a slog where you feel like you're wrestling the game's mechanics the entire time. It's like they wrote down down a bunch of mechanics that sounded really good on paper and then implemented them without actually thinking for a single second about how it would make the gameplay better or worse. I feel bad for complaining so hard about George Romero earlier, because I'd get smacked in the head by George Romero a million times before playing Tranzit again. Okay, listen, right? Are you ready? So get this, right? So remember Nuketown? Remember from Black Ops, everyone loved Nuketown in the multiplayer? Well, what if Nuketown, but like zombies and stuff? Nuketown Zombies, funnily enough, was some of the most fun I had doing this entire video. Because after playing Tranzit, which felt like I was pulling teeth out of my head, playing Nuketown Zombies was a breath of fresh air. It's an incredibly simple map. It's Nuketown from multiplayer, but with new visuals and stuff and zombies. And that's it. That's the whole map. There's no wacky mechanics at all. There's not even a power switch. It's just a zombie survival mode that feels much more akin to the days of Riese and Kino from World at War and Black Ops. There's lots of lore stuff happening in the background, but who cares about any of that, right? The only gimmick, if you can even call it that, is that the perk machines and Pack-a-Punch fall in from the sky at random times in random orders. So sometimes the perks you really need spawn early, and sometimes you have to survive a long time without them. And the Pack-a-Punch can also spawn early or late depending on your luck too. And that mechanic sounds like it could be annoying on repeat playthroughs, but it was actually really cool to play at the time. I was a big fan of it. It wasn't insanely complex, but I didn't need a PhD in zombology to figure it out, and outside of that little one gimmick, it's just a fun zombies map that's very casual player friendly. In fact, this is so casual player friendly that I'm surprised the game didn't launch with this map. You know, like Black Ops, where the launch map was Kino, which was super simple and noob friendly, but the map hidden behind the campaign was 5, which was a lot more difficult. It's a mystery to me why they didn't do that here. Okay, so this is Future Htwo. So while I was editing this video, I actually googled the release date of the map, and it turns out it actually was released on day 1 of Black Ops 2 coming out, but it was only available to people who bought the premium pre-order editions of the game, the Hardened Edition, the Care Package Edition, and the Digital Deluxe Edition, all of which, of course, cost more money than just the base game. And the buyable DLC version didn't come out until the 1st of December 2013, so they could have released it day 1, but they just decided against it to try and make more money on launch, instead of having a better zombies experience on launch. Disgusting. But when I do some digging, it actually seems that a lot of Die-Hard Zombies fans actually don't like Nuketown Zombies very much, because it's too basic and doesn't really add anything interesting. But as someone who isn't a zombologist, that's what actually made me like the map. It was a bog-standard map in what felt like a sea of increasingly complicated maps. If every map was like this, then I'd understand the disappointment. But a map like this to break up the craziness was actually great for me personally. So funnily enough, this seemingly lazy design decision actually made me enjoy the map more because it wasn't overly complicated. Still pretty stupid that this wasn't a launch map though. Now, as much as I know that this is an unpopular opinion, personally, I actually think Die Rise is pretty cool. A lot of people have the same issue with this as they do with Tranzit. They can't just go wherever they want because they have to wait around for the elevators, just like waiting for the bus in Tranzit. But the elevators in Die Rise are so much faster and so much better than the bus could ever be. There's only one bus in Tranzit, and you have to wait for it no matter where you are, because it's the only method of transport, really. But in Die Rise, there's many elevators taking you to lots of different locations. Also, the randomized spawn places of the perks makes it feel fresh, and you actually have to think on the fly instead of just doing the same setup over and over again. There's also this one lift in the starting area that you can make fall, which gives you a much faster route to the power switch. However, it is very easy to get lost in this map. This map is very vertical, but funnily enough, that's not actually the part that makes the layout confusing. It's instead these internal buildings that are built like a maze for some reason. Everything looks exactly the same, and it's a bunch of winding corridors. So you just have to arbitrarily memorize the routes through all of these buildings. For me personally, the verticality had nothing to do with my confusion. It was instead the winding corridors that twisted everywhere and all looked the same. The box spawns in the same place every single time you load the map on, but that spawn point is actually on the roof, which is a cool gimmick, I guess. It looks kinda cool, but it also meant that I spent a good 3 hours playing this map having absolutely no idea where the box was. I walked past it probably 100 times because I'm not looking on the ceiling for a mystery box, because why would I be? But when I finally found it, I felt pretty stupid. This map is actually a ton of fun, at least in my opinion, because the elevators and crazy verticality of the map is really the only wacky thing about it. Outside of that, it feels pretty much like your regular ass zombies mode, which is of course exactly what we want after trying to play Tranzit. The elevators are far more responsive than the bus, but you do have to wait for them. But it's not for very long, so it doesn't feel tedious or too punishing. Instead, the elevators can just cause some tense situations where you have to figure out how to not get pinned while you're waiting for the elevator to finally show up. I can definitely see why people don't like the map, but personally, I was a big fan of it. But the vertical nature of the map isn't completely flawless. Like, some of these drops can just screw you over because they're janky and don't work properly all the time. And of course, even if they do work, these routes to places are one way because you can't climb back up, you have to fall down, which can also make traversing the map feel a little bit slow. But these are minor kinks compared to some of the complaints you could make about a lot of the other maps that have been made at this time period. Honestly, I think the biggest reason why people at the time disliked this map so much was because they were expecting a redemption arc. Tranzit was god-awful, and Nuketown Zombies was too simple. So Die Rise was just doomed from the start, because it had to redeem the entire Black Ops 2 Zombies experience, and when people could find fault in it, they just took that as the entire map being bad. When in reality, tensions were just really high in the community because of how shoddy the release of the Zombies game mode as a whole was in Black Ops 2. I think when you try and take a step back and look at Die Rise more objectively for what it is, it's actually quite a good map. It's certainly not perfect, but it's pretty cool. Something that people back in the day perhaps couldn't see through all the rage and fury. But of course, Treyarch knew that their player base wasn't happy, but they weren't done making maps yet. And by some miracle, the next map they released was one of their most highly praised maps that they'd ever released up until this point. One that's considered a classic by the Zombies community today. Mob of the Dead is regarded as one of the best maps that Treyarch ever made, and although I don't necessarily agree, I can certainly see why. The main mechanic of this map is the afterlife. When you die, instead of going down like normal, you instead become a weird lightning ghost thing. And instead of a power switch that turns the entire map's power on, instead there are these little generator switch things that you can zap while in the afterlife to activate the power for just this one generator. Generally, each perk machine has its own power generator. And then there's the gondola, which is this map's transport system that also has its own power generator. And this afterlife mechanic also helps you kill zombies too, which is pretty neat. It also removes the need for quick revive, so that perk just isn't in the map. It's a really cool gimmick that actually feels like it's well thought out, and it improves the gameplay instead of just being there for a laugh. Although there is something important to remember about Mob of the Dead, and that is that the map came out about 6 months after the release of Black Ops 2. That's 6 entire months, which is more than enough time for all of the people who aren't hardcore zombie nerds to be weeded out. The only people left playing zombies at this point were the people who were extremely dedicated to it. The casuals had already gone on to play literally anything else. So this map was very widely praised by players at the time, but players at the time were almost exclusively very big fans of the zombie game mode as a whole. But for a casual audience, this map is a little bit alienating, and I personally am definitely part of that casual audience here. I'm not one of the hardcore zombie players that is super invested in the game mode. So personally, although I did enjoy this map and thought it did a lot of cool things, I didn't see it as being the masterpiece that a lot of other players saw it as, because I don't really think I was the target audience of this map. This map has a very long and convoluted setup. Just accessing the Pack-a-Punch alone requires a ton of scouting and puzzle completing to get parts for a plane that you build on the roof of the prison, which then takes you to the Golden Gate Bridge where the Pack-a-Punch is. And if you want a Pack-a-Punch again, you have to collect fuel for the plane, which is a fancy way of saying that you have to go collect all the parts all over again. Once you know where the parts are and how to get them, it's not too complicated. But on a first playthrough, it's incredibly difficult to have any idea what the hell you're meant to be doing. And even when you do know what to do, actually doing it is incredibly time consuming, and it feels like a chore to do on repeated playthroughs. There's also the Hell's Redeemer, which is like a special weapon that's basically a really strong tomahawk. Unlocking this requires a similarly lengthy process of feeding zombies to 3 dog heads that appear on the walls across the map, and then going to a location to pick up the weapon. And then you can upgrade that weapon with even more rigmarole on top of that. This map is really cool, and it's really fun to play, but all of this complexity really starts to intrude on the gameplay when you're playing the map multiple times in a row. The setup is so time consuming that by the time you've done it, you're already on round 10 to 15, and only then can you actually start doing all of the normal zombie game mode stuff where you train them and try and survive. The map's setting is incredible, and there's a really good cohesive story about the people trying to escape the prison and whatever. And this warden zombie is a scary bastard, and I love it. But it's definitely alienating to a casual audience to have all of this complicated stuff going on that is essential to your survival. And this came back to bite them in the arse when they released Black Ops 3, because the launch map for Black Ops 3 was very similar to Mob of the Dead. It was called Shadows of Evil, but it was not that well received like they expected it to be, because a launch day map needs to be casual friendly, and this just really isn't that. So as much as Mob of the Dead was definitely enjoyable, it was definitely a slog to record footage for after a few hours of trial and error to figure out what I was supposed to do, and a few more hours of trying to actually do it without dying. But luckily for me and all the casuals that might still be playing zombies by this point, their next map was a lot less complicated, but it did still have some unique mechanics to work with. First thing worth noting is that this map is beautiful. The old western aesthetic is great. The spooky ghost house with the spooky ghosts I'm especially a fan of. This map's one key gimmick is this big guy over here. His name's Arthur, apparently. I don't have any idea how people figured that out, but it's on the wiki, so it must be true. If you find and then give him a bit of bev, he'll sprint in the opposite direction of you and break any barricade that he hits. So there's a bunch of doors that you can't actually buy, and you have to use him to destroy instead. You can also give him candy and he'll fight for you. There's some other things he can do, like making the mystery box never move and stuff like that, but I never figured that out while playing the game myself. This big guy's a pretty cool mechanic, and he doesn't feel too complicated or obnoxious to deal with. He's pretty slow to follow you at times, which can be annoying, but nothing too major to complain about. The weird thing about it is that the fact that you can actually just bypass him entirely with the new wonder weapon called the Paralyzer. It lets you fly over stuff like this, which on its own is kind of cool, but the fact that it's in this map in particular makes it feel like a weird addition. It's like they designed this whole mechanic around this big dude who you have to try and control to open up the map, but then you can just not do that and fly over everything with a wonder weapon instead. There's also the spooky ghost house where there's these spooky ghost ladies and they'll attack you, and if they reach you they'll steal your points, and killing all of them rewards you with a random free perk, which is pretty cool. You know, the worst part of this map, hands down, is the fact that there's a maze in it. Mazes are just the worst mechanic in any game ever. I've played enough TF2 jump maps to know that mazes just shouldn't be there. It serves absolutely no gameplay benefit whatsoever. It just punishes new players for absolutely no reason. Because you can memorize the layout of the maze if you play the map a bunch, but new players don't get to do this, so they get lost and die in the maze, and it's dumb. You can also just fly over the maze with the Paralyzer, but if I don't have this weapon, then I guess sucks to be me, I'm lost in the maze. And another thing that's really funny is that there's this fountain in the middle of the maze, and if you shoot it a bunch or throw grenades at it or whatever, it opens up a big hole. So I was like, oh, I found a secret, that's cool. Well, I wonder what's inside.
Wait, you just destroyed this. Look.
Oh? It killed me. I died. Death is inside. I'm not sure if I'm just an idiot or if this is maliciously put here to trick people into thinking they found a secret, but either way, I'm mad about it. But if we pretend that the maze that leads to the Pack-a-Punch just doesn't exist, then I actually quite liked this map. There's a bank on this map, which is of course cringe because the bank mechanic completely destroys the gameplay loop of the game, but there's definitely a good map here, even if it has the odd flaw or two. I think the big giant fella is super interesting, and the setting is really cool. It wasn't too big, it wasn't too complicated, yet it wasn't too simplistic either, which again is a breath of fresh air from the other maps we've been given in Black Ops 2 so far. Now, there's actually only one map left to talk about before my list of classic zombies maps comes to an end, but before I talk about Black Ops 2's final hurrah, I first want to talk about the game that comes next. So I bought 2 copies of Black Ops 3, one for myself and one for the person I was playing all these games with. The plan was to play every single map from this game too, because apparently these maps are also considered classics by the wider Zombies community. But I didn't end up playing any of the Black Ops 3 maps, because I encountered a roadblock very quickly. I bought the entire game on Steam, which when it's not on sale costs £45 for an 8-year-old game. But that 45 quid price tag didn't give me all the Zombies maps. I would have to pay an extra 30 quid on top of that to get access to every map I want to play. This price would also have to be paid twice because I was playing with another person, so that instantly doubles the price of entry. Now, I am aware that this is also how it worked on consoles back in the day, like, I know that. And it was scummy at the time, and it's still scummy now. But that's not the only reason I didn't decide to include Black Ops 3, because maybe I would have caved in and given Activision more of my money, you know, just for the content, just for the video. But I refused to do so on principle alone after realizing that Black Ops 3 introduced a whole new mechanic to zombies, something that completely tanks the experience into the ground purely for monetary gain. And that mechanic is gobblegums.
That's like taking candy from a baby, without the baby.
Gobblegums on their own are kind of cool as an addition, actually. There's a little machine on the map that lets you roll the dice to get one of 5 different power-ups that all do cool different things. Yeah, pretty powerful, and you can actually have a loadout that alters which gobblegums you bring into the game. So your list of 5 potential gobblegums from the machine is entirely within your control, which is actually a really interesting idea, because customization was something that was entirely lacking from all of the other Zombies games up until this point. But what isn't cool, and is in fact completely unacceptable, and completely destroys the entire Zombies experience for Black Ops 3 as a whole, is Mega Gobblegums. Mega Gobblegums have 2 key differences from the normal ones. Difference number 1 is that they're limited time use. If you have only one in your loadout and you use it in game, you cannot use it again until you get more. Difference number 2 is that they're locked behind loot box mechanics, because of course they would be locked behind loot box mechanics. You use this in-game currency, a currency that you can buy for real money, to roll the dice on this literal slot machine to get Mega Gobblegums that are added to your inventory. They are limited time use, so you have to keep doing this over and over if you want to keep using them. And Mega Gobblegums are way more powerful and way more game-changing than the normal ones are. Because of course, the ones that cost money have to be the most powerful ones. They added disgusting intrusive microtransactions to a game that already costs AAA prices right out of the box, and already has microtransactions in the form of map packs to begin with. And the Mega Gobblegums are completely game-breaking. You can spawn a fire sale instantly. Spawn one of every power-up in the entire game. You can give yourself every single perk in the entire map, round 1. They all completely break the normal gameplay loop and trivialize the experience entirely. And they're gated mostly behind real-world money being spent on the game. You can earn this blue juice stuff that lets you spin the wheel, but it's of course earned way slower than just spending money. It's 2015, so this is when every single games company was trying to milk players for all that they're worth all the time. And I refuse to spend a single penny on this abject dog shit. So I refuse to buy their overpriced map packs for a game that's 8 years old just to play this video. I'm not doing it. And if you're wondering why I didn't pirate all of this stuff, it's because I ran into technical issues that wouldn't let me play multiplayer on a pirated version. So that's why Black Ops 3 doesn't get included in this video. Because I just refuse to spend over £120 on Activision's garbage microtransaction hellscape on an 8-year-old game just for content for this video. But to finish up the video that I'm actually willing to make, there's one last map I'd like to talk about. And to make sure I got my money's worth, I played this map multiple times both in Black Ops 2 and in Black Ops 3. And that map is of course Origins. Luckily for my sanity, I get to end this video off with a map that I actually really liked a lot. Origins does a lot of things right, a lot of things that I'm a really big fan of. The tone that Zombies has been going for since the start has always been pretty topsy-turvy. It goes for these bleak horror aesthetics, but all the characters are being all jaunty and over the top constantly.
Hoorah!
But Origins, for seemingly the first time in Zombies history, has a consistent tone throughout. The characters' personalities are drastically different here, and they're different for the better in my opinion. They actually feel like they're meant to be in the world they find themselves in, and they don't constantly break the fourth wall and scream goofy one-liners. And the visuals of this map are incredible. These giant robots dominate the skyline and are actually a really cool stage hazard that you have to avoid. There's also these generators that work as the power system. Instead of one big power switch, you instead charge these individual power switches at different areas of the map. And later in the game, you have to defend them from zombies to keep the power active. It's a really cool alternative to the power switches that actually forces you to engage with the mechanic. You don't just turn it on and forget it, because you need all 6 generators to be active before you can use the Pack-a-Punch machine, so you'll need to keep them active if you want to re-Pack-a-Punch your weapons or change them out for new ones. This is a great mechanic that is engaging for basically the entire game. There's also these shovels that let you dig stuff up, which is a minor mechanic that's kind of interesting. The only thing that I actually disliked about Origins is the wonder weapons, because if I was complaining that Mob of the Dead was too complicated to access the Pack-a-Punch, then the wonder weapons in Origins are completely baffling. There are staff parts that you need to collect all around the map. There's 4 different staffs, 3 parts for each staff. You also need to find discs. Each disc corresponds to a different staff and a different portal. You then play the disc in the right place on a gramophone that you found to go through a portal to get through a spot where you can find the final part to each staff. Then you use a different disc to go through a different portal to go to the place where you actually build the staff. And then God forbid that you actually want to upgrade the staff, because there's literally riddles you have to solve to go find out how to do it. This is so unbelievably complicated that I literally didn't get footage of it one time. I had to use someone else's footage of them doing it, which I'll try and link in the description. Each of the staffs has different staff parts in set locations, other than the ice staff, which is semi-random. Figuring any of this out on your own seems nigh on impossible, which of course makes sense. Origins is the last map in the game's life cycle, which means that the people this map is targeted at are the hardcore players, which is of course not me, because I'm a filthy casual. But unlike Mob of the Dead, the crazy questline to get the wonder weapons isn't actually a necessity to playing the map normally and surviving. The Pack-a-Punch is pretty much essential, so Mob of the Dead's questline is also essential. But you could definitely forego using the staffs in Origins if you didn't want to go through all of this complicated questline stuff, which is a big part of why I liked Origins so much more than Mob of the Dead. Because yeah, they're both really complicated, which I wasn't massively a fan of, but all of the complexity in Origins is relatively avoidable by a casual idiot noob loser like myself, so I just don't really have to interact with it. All of the Easter egg hunters that want to figure out that you have to shoot down one plane in particular, or shoot the giant's foot and get inside it, or want to decode riddles to upgrade their wonder weapons or whatever, those people can do that, because at least it's not something crucial like the Pack-a-Punch machine that's locked behind all of this Easter egg stuff. And the tone actually feeling cohesive is something that I feel like they've literally never achieved up until this point. These panzer zombies in big giant suits of armor were really cool, even though I died to them like constantly and couldn't really figure out how to consistently kill them. I think Origins is a perfect ending point for Black Ops 2, because it truly is the best map in the entirety of the game. And considering how this game started out, it's a miracle that they did anything even close to this good. It manages to give casual players a fun and exciting map that doesn't require a zombology degree to complete, while also giving the hardcore Easter egg goblins a really complex quest to uncover. Also, the giant robots are really funny. Call of Duty Zombies has had one hell of a life cycle. Many of these older maps are held in incredibly high regard even to this day, which is no surprise. And after this point is where Zombies started to have some pretty huge ups and downs. Most of the player base suggests that the golden age of Zombies took place at some point during these 3 games, and I had a blast playing all of them. Well, mostly anyway. How cool was that?
My bullet went through a zombie as well.
I think that's really cool. Thanks for watching.